Hello, everyone, and welcome to this edition of Phillies Talk. It's the Phillies Talk podcast. It's the longest running independent show talking about the Philadelphia Phillies. My name is Rich Baxter, and I'm joined with you, along with Matt Veazey from @PhilliesBell on Twitter. How you doing, Matt?
Awesome, Rich. Beautiful day here in Philly. Beautiful,
Yes,
cloudy, cold day.
yes, it is a little chilly out there still, as we expect here in winter. And we got an extra special guest on this week's show. I've been trying to get him on for a while now. Scott Lauber from the Philadelphia Inquirer. How you doing, Scott?
Doing well, Rich. Thanks for having me.
That's awesome. Thank you for joining us. And you're a longtime writer with the Philadelphia Inquirer. And I didn't realize till I read it today, you're actually back at the Inquirer since 2006. And that's a long time. Tell us a little bit about your career of writing for baseball, about baseball.
Yeah, so just as a point of clarity, so I covered the Phillies from 2006 to the spring of 2010 for the Wilmington News Journal down in Wilmington, Delaware. And then I moved on to Boston, wrote for the Boston Herald and covered the Red Sox from 2010 to 2015, covered the Red Sox for ESPN.com from 2016 to the spring of 2018, and then moved back here to work for the Inquirer and cover the Phillies since 2018. So that's kind of my journey. A little bit of ping ponging between Philly and Boston, but I've been back now for 5 years at the Inquirer and thrilled to be back covering the team that I started covering when I began covering Major League Baseball back in 2006.
Where are you actually from, Scott?
I'm from New Jersey. I grew up about an hour north of Philly. So I grew up kind of in that middle part of New Jersey where, you meet half the people who are like New York transplants and half people who have Philly ties. So I'm kind of a classic New Jersey sort of mixed breed kind of kid.
Yeah, I'm a South Philly guy, and we always went down the shore to like Wildwood,
Mm-hmm.
and it was almost all Philly, sports crowd down there. But I have family who go to Seaside Heights, and I've been there with them a couple times, and that's right down the middle. You get Yankees fans, some Mets fans, Philly fans.
Yeah, so if I'm being completely honest with you, my parents are both New Yorkers, transplanted New Yorkers who moved out to the Jersey suburbs when I was a year old. So my dad to this day is a huge, huge Yankee fan. So we would go most of the time to Yankee Stadium to go watch games when I was a kid. But we would go down to the vet at least once a year, usually to catch a game. And I used to go to the vet, believe it or not, a lot with day camp. They used to run bus trips to do like a Thursday afternoon business person special camp day, And I would always sort of find that the vet was kind of like, the vet, you go to a Phillies game and you'd see the fanatic, and you would kind of have that sort of family kind of environment. And you'd go to New York, and even as a kid, with the pinstripes and all of that, it was a little bit more kind of corporate stuffy, a little bit sense some of the time. So I got a little bit of a taste of both. But my dad is to this day is an enormous Yankee fan. And so every time I call him during the baseball season, I have to hear about what's going on with the Yankees and all of that. So he doesn't miss a game. So that's kind of my background in going to both and getting exposed to both at a very young age. And then, of course, I went to college in Boston at Boston University, and I got exposed to that fandom up there, the Fenway phenomenon, which they hadn't won the World Series yet when I was there in college. A lot has changed since my college days, but that is also a fan base unto itself in terms of how it responds and reacts to its team. So there are a lot of similarities to me between Boston and Philly. The main difference being in Philly, there hasn't been nearly as much winning as there's been up there in the last 20 years. And so they're a little bit spoiled and we're a little bit starved down here. And but the passion is the same, and the intensity for their teams is the same. Someone in my position, you can't write enough about the team you cover because it gets consumed very, very quickly, and people want more.
True.
That's true. I'm coming from you live here in outside of Atlantic City. It's a Starbucks. If you can see behind me, it's bustling coffee house here. And Scott, I just wanted to bring up your two books that you've written. People can still get them, by the way. One is Phillies Confidential, the untold inside story of the 2008 championship season, which is great format. I love the smallness of this book. It's easy to hold. You can take it to the beach with you, and it always makes for a great read. And you also have the Big 50 that was published in 2020, the top 50 players in Phillies baseball history. Could you talk a little bit about those books?
Sure. Thanks for bringing it up, Rich. Yeah, you bring back a lot of fond memories with the first one, the Phillies Confidential one. That's something I worked on. That was a project with Gary Matthews, who at the time was a Phillies broadcaster. He was doing television for, I think it was still considered Comcast back then, Comcast Sportsnet. Now, of course, it's NBC Sports Philadelphia. And that was kind of a labor of love, because we worked on it throughout the course of the 2008 season. And as that season unfolded, we all know what happened and we all know how it ended. The publisher kept moving up the publishing date of that book. Like, it was, I think, going to come out originally in spring training of 2009. And as the Phillies went through the postseason, the publisher kept calling me and saying, hey, if they win the whole thing, we want to get this thing out by Thanksgiving. And I said, Thanksgiving? Are you crazy? And so we kind of had to put our foot on the pedal a little bit and get it finished and get it done. And I remember speaking to Sarge on the phone on the day of the parade. It was on the night of the parade, actually. The parade was over, and kind of trying to put some finishing touches on it so that we could get it to the publisher in time. But we got extremely lucky with how that season wound up, that it was a memorable year and that it was a historic year, for the Phillies. And so that was a lot of fun. It's kind of a day by day accounting of that season. And my half of the book is sort of a reporting of what happened on that particular day. We didn't touch on every single day. We touched on, the notable ones. And then Gary filled in the rest with kind of commentary and stuff like that. And then the second book, thanks for mentioning Phillies, the Big 50. That was my second time back here, and the publisher called me, and they were working on this series of books about franchise, the history of some very kind of historic and long-standing franchises in baseball and really throughout sports. They did one with the Flyers. They wanted to do one with the Phillies, and I was more than happy to take on that project. And kind of what I wanted to turn it into was, it's the way it's laid out is it's sort of 50 essays about 50 of the most important people and or teams and or moments in the history of the franchise, which goes back to 1883. And look, to be honest with you, right? I mean, if you're going to sit down and write a chapter about Mike Schmidt in 2020, there's not a whole lot to tell that hasn't already been told. He's written his own book. He's been covered, really throughout. And what I wanted to do was kind of find angles or stories that were new to me or that I hadn't heard. And so, for example, for the Mike Schmidt chapter, I reached out to Rick Shue, who replaced Mike Schmidt at third base and actually played with him on the same team. Schmidt moved across the diamond to first base, and talked to him about what it was like to play with Mike Schmidt in Mike Schmidt's position. And I thought it was kind of an interesting perspective, something I had not heard before. And we tried to sort of tell Mike Schmidt's story in that way. So I hope that I was able to achieve that with that book and sort of tell some stories about some very, very notable and popular figures in franchise history that were new. At least they were new to me, and hopefully they were new to a lot of readers.
Yeah, absolutely. And me and my original co-host of this show actually talked to Gary Matthews on the first book. And my friend Jim, at the time, he passed away a couple years ago, but he had a great rapport with Gary Matthews, and he loved that call when Ryan Howard would have hit a home run, and he'd say he jumps into his Cadillac again, like, do you remember that call? That was a great call. I used to love Gary Matthews as an announcer for the Phillies. Probably one of the few, but I still loved his call of the game.
I do remember that call. And it was sort of, I think he used it several times. I think he may have even used it in the book. And the way that book was, the way we worked on that project was we'd sit down every few days and we would, I forget when we started it. We started during the season. And so we had to go backwards and then forwards. So we had to go back and cover some things that had already happened, and then forwards to kind of cover some things that were happening in real time. And I know that there was that expression, and then there were other sargisms that he definitely dropped throughout the course of that book. And it was kind of like there were times I had to break out my Sarge to English dictionary, right, to figure out what's he talking about here. But it was great because it was true to him and it was who he was, and we tried to make sure that his voice stayed as much a part of that book as possible.
Yeah, that second book, Rich, I during the pandemic in May of 2020, the Big 50, I reviewed that for Phillies Bell, and I just posted up a link at Phillies Bell on Twitter. So if anybody wants to go read that review of Scott's book, and that article contains links where they can actually purchase the book at Amazon. So it's a great read for any Phillies fan.
I appreciate that, Mike. Thank you.
Awesome. Let's get on to the Phillies with their signings of 2023 here. It doesn't seem like they're ending too much here, just acquiring Gregory Soto from the Detroit Tigers. And what can you tell us about the Phillies signings this offseason, Scott? How do you rate them all?
So I've covered Dave Dombrowski since 2015 when he started with the Red Sox. And I was saying this the other day on a radio show. My experience with him is that when he goes into an offseason with very specific needs on his roster, he tends to act very decisively and usually pretty quickly. When there's more to do or there are broader needs on a team, that's maybe when an offseason takes a little longer to unfold. But this year, they went into the offseason knowing they needed a middle infielder, specifically a shortstop, and they got Trey Turner, and they did it pretty quickly into the offseason. It happened the first week of December at the winter meetings. They crossed that off their list. And then they needed a fourth starter, or I should say a middle-of-the-rotation starter, kind of a 3A or a 4, and they got Taijuan Walker, and they did it early. They did it also during the winter meetings. And then really the last thing that they had to attack was their bullpen, and they did it in systematically. Matt Strahm was the first one that they acquired. He's a lefty. The Kimbrel signing, which the agreement was at the end of the month in December, and then they finalized it last week. And now the trade for Gregory Soto. And of those three moves, I felt like they needed three relievers because they lost Knebel, they lost Robertson, and they lost Brad Hand, all to free agency. And so they replaced them essentially with Strahm and Kimbrel and Soto. And of those three, look, the Soto one they discussed it at the winter meetings. It didn't go very, very far. Their conversations with the Tigers. Tigers reached out again last week, and it came together fairly quickly. So that's sort of how trades go sometimes. But of the two signings, the one that really kind of surprised me was Kimbrel, because Kimbrel's background, really since the day he got drafted, was as a closer. He's always closed, except for that, 2 months at the end of that season in 21 with the White Sox, where he was a setup guy. He's always closed. And the Reds and the Phillies, as we know, don't really deploy one closer under Rob Thompson. That's not how they've done it. They've spread those opportunities out. They've based their decisions on matchups and game situations. And so I'm curious to see how this unfolds. Like, how does I've referred to him as sort of the natural born closer, Craig Kimbrel. How does he adapt to not always closing? And had a chance to talk to him last week, and he said, I understand how bullpens are run these days, and specifically the one here with the Phillies, and I'm totally open to doing pitching wherever in the game that they want me to pitch, and we'll see how it unfolds. But they certainly acquired a guy who's an accomplished closer. Soto is think of Jose Alvarado, and that's really Soto. He throws really hard. Command kind of comes and goes at times. They think that they can maybe harness that command the way they did with Alvarado really in the second half of last year. So they've got a lot of back end types now between Soto and Kimbrel and Dominguez and Alvarado, and they think Brogdon can pitch late in the game. So lots of options for Rob Thompson late in the game. And it's unusual that the Phillies are going to go to spring training with really seven spots in the bullpen pretty much accounted for. Usually you have some competition back there. That's health permitting. That's not going to be the case this year. Their bullpen looks relatively set.
Yeah, this is like the third straight year. You were talking about Dombrowski, going in with needs, and the bullpen. I think everybody, anybody who follows the team closely knows 2020, 2021, the bullpen was probably the primary reason that they didn't make the postseason. And Dombrowski tried each of those off seasons to add, and prior to 2022, trying to add veteran bullpen arms. And for the most part, whether it was Robertson's injury or just guys just didn't work out, it just hasn't worked out. And now we're adding 3 more veteran guys, and there's a lot of hope and a lot of positivity around them. And I have a lot of positivity around them. But it all reminds me of an old saying that my dad used to say growing up was, if you throw enough stink at the wall, some of it's going to stick. And these guys, they have a track record, so, let's just hopefully, I'm sure the Phillies feel the same way. Let's just hope that they live up to the better parts or close to the better parts of their career track records, and then we'll have something. And the homegrown guys are pretty good too. Sir Anthony back was a huge boost for the bullpen last year. So, let's hope it all works out. The bullpen looks good.
Yeah, it's a great point, Matt. And look, I mean, this is sometimes how it works with bullpens, right? Like even the best relievers from year to year, there's a fluctuation there in a lot of cases. And one of the things that underlines all of these moves in the bullpen for me is that they really trust what I call their pitching brain trust, or their pitching department. And that's Caleb Cotham, their pitching coach, and Brian Kaplan, who's the director of pitching, who works really alongside Cotham. And they trust that those guys, who both bring a very analytical sort of mindset to the position, but seem to understand how to communicate with players and not be too analytics heavy in terms of how they're communicating their message, they can get through to these players. I mean, look, Alvarado was a different pitcher when he came back from the minor leagues last year. And some of that was pitch usage, and how he would throw his slider, and how he would, kind of deploy his pitches in various situations. They've figured out a way to kind of optimize performance in a lot of these guys, and that's a lot of it. That's a lot of it, because look, you're not going out there and signing guys who don't have talent. I mean, you're going out there and you're acquiring guys with talent. It's just figuring out how to harness it and how to put them in positions where the talent plays up. And they've been able to do that better in the last year. I mean, look, as recently as the end of May, when, we all remember that series in Atlanta, the Nick Nelson game, and then they went to New York and they got swept. And, we were all looking at and we remember the game against the Mets at home, that 9th inning blow up, which, for the ages, early in May, like as late
that was
as
a nightmare.
Memorial Day. Yeah, right. As late as Memorial Day, we were saying, same old Phillies bullpen. And it turned into a pretty good bullpen the second half of the year. And a lot of it is some of the adjustments that Cotham and Kaplan were able to make with some of these guys as the year unfolded. And so while there are questions about, how Kimbrel ended last year with the Dodgers, he wasn't on their playoff roster. He got taken out of the closer role in September, didn't have a strong finish to the year. And there may be questions about like Gregory Soto's command and things like that. They believe that they have the answers to some of these issues that will help, very good pitchers become even better. And look, there's no denying. I mean, for me, Craig Kimbrel has been the best closer in baseball the last 10 years, or certainly one of the best 2 or 3. So, you're acquiring a very talented pitcher with a very, very strong track record, potentially a Hall of Fame track record. Now, can you get him at age 34 to sort of move into the next phase of his career where he doesn't throw as hard as he used to? Maybe the curveball plays a little differently now than it did before, or whatever. I mean, they think they have some answers to help these guys move into, this next phase of their careers with the Phillies and succeed. So we'll see.
Yes, we will. And I was listening to Billy Wagner coming in on to the show here on MLB Network Radio. Just wanted to ask you, you wrote an article on January 6th here, which I happen to have a copy of. And it says, will Craig Kimbrel reemerge as closer for the Phillies? His twin, Billy Wagner, believes he can. Can you tell what Billy told you about Craig Kimbrel?
Yeah, so they go back a long way, Billy Wagner and Craig Kimbrel, back to 2010. And the backstory there is that Wagner was at the tail end of his career, and the Braves signed him as a free agent to close for them in 2010. And they had a kid in the minor leagues, a prospect they really liked named Craig Kimbrel. And when they drafted Kimbrel, they looked at him as sort of a mirror image of Billy Wagner. Kimbrel's slightly bigger than Wagner, but not by much. He's barely 6 feet, if he's 6 feet. He's, was kind of a skinny kid. Wagner, we all know, was an undersized reliever who threw incredibly hard, considering he was, 5'10" and 180 pounds. And Kimbrel was the same, threw very, very hard. Right-handed, Wagner was left-handed. So the mirror image thing, but they saw a lot of similarities there. And Frank Wren, who was the GM of the Braves at the time, would routinely call Kimbrel the right-handed Billy Wagner. And so they acquired Wagner, and he's on the phone with Roger McDowell, who was the pitching coach of the Braves at the time. And McDowell said, "Can't wait for you to get to spring training and see this kid. We really like him. You're gonna think you're looking in a mirror." And sure enough, Wagner gets there. He meets Kimbrel, and it was like, oh my gosh, this guy and I have a lot in common. And, they pitched, the Braves wanted Wagner because they wanted him to close for them, but they also kind of wanted him to take Kimbrel under his wing a little bit, which he did do in 2010, and they remained close for a few years. They're not super close. Well, they don't talk all that much anymore.
Uh-huh.
But, Wagner brings an interesting perspective because he pitched here. He was a closer for a long time. That they actually have the identical ERAs. Like Kimbrel's career ERA at this point is the same as what Wagner finished up with. So they've had very similar careers. Kimbrel is, I believe, 6 saves away from becoming the 7th closer ever to have 400. Wagner is one of the 7. So very similar careers to this point. And Wagner said to me, look, the role of closer and really the way bullpens are managed in general has changed a lot over the years, not just since Wagner retired, but really since the middle of Kimbrel's career. There aren't as many teams that just use one closer anymore. It's not just closer, setup guy anymore. Teams stack their bullpens with guys who throw 100. Look at the Astros and the bullpen that they trotted out during the World Series. They had 4 guys who they could have closed with on any given night. So he said, look, a lot of that has changed, and you need to have interchangeable parts now. But he said, trust me when I tell you that it takes a special kind of cat to pitch the 9th inning and get the last 3 outs. And when you've got Craig Kimbrel sitting back there with 394 career saves, you might feel a little bit inclined to use him in the 9th inning whenever you get the chance. It's where he's always succeeded. And it actually might free you up to use a Dominguez or an Alvarado or now a Soto earlier in the game than you would have ordinarily, knowing you have Kimbrel back there waiting in the 9th. So we'll see how it goes. I know the Phillies don't intend to designate a closer. They don't intend to anoint Kimbrel as their 9th inning guy. He might be asked to pitch in the 7th and 8th quite a bit, but we'll see if he pitches well, whether they do kind of fall back a little bit on the fact that Craig Kimbrel's been one of the best 9th inning guys in baseball now for over 10 years.
That's awesome. I can't wait for this season. They have a lot of weapons now in the bullpen. Scott, I know you have to run. I appreciate you stopping by the program here to talk with us, and hope to have you back on a future show.
Sure. I'm happy to join anytime. Thanks, Rich. Thanks, Matt. And Happy New Year to you guys, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Scott. Happy New Year.
Take care.
Thanks. You too.
That was Scott Lauber from the Philadelphia Inquirer. He's the beat writer for them. And Matt, always great to talk to somebody that follows the team as close as the beat writers do. And Scott's been a favorite of mine over the years.
Yeah, he's really good. He was really generous today, and he was really generous back when I was reviewing his book. And yeah, good guy. He provides good information. straightforward. He's got a great background in the game. So, yeah, it's nice to have him on. And he brought up some good topics. We didn't get to touch everything we would have liked to with him, but, he is limited on time. But he touched on that Billy Wagner, Craig Kimbrel deal. And we all remember Craig Kimbrel when he first came to Philly. He was here for a couple of years, I believe. And it was right when Citizens Bank Park opened. And I remember every time these side scoreboards that tracked the mileage would hit 100, the crowd would just roar. The Philly crowd would just roar, and it was a big deal back then. You go back 20 years, 15, 20 years, you didn't have as many guys throwing 100 miles an hour. Hardly any. I mean, now it seems like it's much more common. It's still not. Everybody doesn't throw 100, and even the guys who do, it's not like they're throwing it every single, pitch or every time out. But back then it was even more rare. And Billy Wagner was one of the few who was lighting it up regularly with triple digits. For me, Billy Wagner's a Hall of Famer. The only thing I hate about Billy Wagner was that he left here, went to the Mets, which, then it was like, oh my, I can't believe I just loved this guy for a couple of years. And now he's up there. So, but yeah, it was good. And, Kimbrel, like he mentioned, has been one of the top. I don't know if I would say the best, but he's definitely been. I think he's right in saying he's been one of the maybe 3 best relievers. You throw in maybe Kenley Jansen, and I know I'm forgetting somebody else, but there's like 3 of them who've really been on top of their game for the last decade. So I'm glad to have Kimbrel on board now. I'm glad to have Soto on board, and I think the weapons that Rob Thompson is going to have coming out of the bullpen, assuming everybody stays healthy, are going to be better than they've had at any point in the last decade. So it's a strong point. It looks like a strong suit of the team right now. And he's right. Last year, through Memorial Day, they stunk. And it looked like we were losing. I mean, this is when Girardi got fired. I mean, it really looked like we were in for another disappointing season. And with Bryce going out with his injury, and I would say, for me, one of the big, if not the biggest piece, Rich, of what happened over last summer when they really rebounded and took off, and they were as good as anybody in the National League from about June 1st on. It was that turnaround in the bullpen that really made a difference. The bullpen did a 180. And they became a real strong suit from then on out. And I think that ability to shut down leads at the end of the game, which they didn't have those first 2 months of the season, it's a somewhat overlooked part of what made the Phillies a playoff team last year, finally.
Absolutely. And just as Scott told us, the Phillies are going to have good choices to make next year, or actually this year already. In 2023, you have like 5 guys that can theoretically close a game. So it's going to be closer by committee almost, I think, in the early goings. I don't think anybody's going to have the edge over anyone else. You have Dominguez that's been doing it. You've had Alvarado that's been doing it. Soto is capable of doing it. And you have Kimbrel. So this is almost like the Phillies starting rotation of 2008, 2009. Bunch of weapons in that bullpen. I'm overly pleased with this. And as I said, I can't wait for the season to start. Been calling up the season ticket office, trying to, do things here and there, get up to the Hall of Fame level, which is a hard thing to do. But, I just can't wait for the season. And let's talk a little bit about the starters here. The Phillies picking up Taijuan Walker from the Mets. And I know we talked about him a little bit in our last show of 2022. But how do you think the Phillies starting 5 will be this year? And how do you think they'll be successful?
Well, I think they're going to be improved, Rich, because the one thing that's a slight concern to me is the extended season. The season was essentially extended for them by a month because of the postseason. And that means that you had to use Zach Wheeler and Aaron Nola, particularly, another half dozen times, that you maybe didn't anticipate. is that overblown? I don't know, because I remember Cole Hamels coming out, the difference between his 2008 and his 2009. It seemed like a big difference to me. But not every pitcher who was on that 2008 rotation had the same problem in 09. So, I think that Walker I like better than Kyle Gibson. So in that regard, Ranger Suarez, I think, is picked up some tremendous experience last year down the stretch and in the postseason. So I like this rotation going into the season better than I have at any point in the last, maybe 7 or 8 years. They just have to do it now. And the big thing, Rich, is going to be health. Like the pitchers, you just never know. If a pitcher goes down for the season or is out for an extended period, that really puts a strain on you. So my hope was that maybe they would still even add one more arm. There are a lot of veterans who are still unsigned, and a bunch of these guys are going to sign 1-year deals, hoping to, maybe earn themselves, a multi-year deal after that. So I still wouldn't mind seeing them, even if they wait until spring training and say, hey, this guy's still out there. He made 25, 30 starts last year. Let's, throw him a couple of $1 million and bring him in, for as our 5th starter, rather than, going with the younger guys. I know they have high hopes for Andrew Painter and the other 2 prospects who are coming up right behind him. But I mentioned Painter because he's the one that's mentioned the most. I like the veterans, and you can always, if you get the right veteran, maybe somebody who will come in with an invitation to spring training, who will be willing to maybe go down to AAA to pitch for a couple of months. It's nice to have that veteran presence in your rotation when somebody goes down. So I go back to 2011, how strong that staff was. And when you think about the 2011 Phillies, everybody talks about the big 4 guys. The Phillies got in 2011 a lot of starts from their 5th, 6th, 7th starters that year. You had Halladay, Lee, Hamels, and Oswalt, but Vance Worley made 21 starts for that team. Kyle Kendrick made 15 starts for that team. Joe Blanton made 8 starts. So they had depth, and it was veteran depth. So I'd like to see them maybe glom on to one of those, veteran arms. But yeah, I like it. I like the way it looks right now, Rich.
That's awesome. And of course, the biggest story in the news today was Carlos Correa and his agreement with the Mets falling through. I can tell you, Matt, I was very happy to hear this, especially for the Phillies. I didn't want to see Correa facing the Phillies, 7 times this year. I think the Mets and the Phillies, or is it 17? I think they lost 3 games, 15, somewhere around there. But it's going to be a lot of times that the Phillies play the Mets. And I'm so glad to see Correa won't be there for all those games.
I always like to see, the whole Mets thing, Rich. It's obviously it's a big rivalry, and a division rivalry in the Philly New York thing. But after 9/11, I promised myself that I would never, and up to that point, I was when 9/11 hit, I was 39 years old. So I had spent, the first 30 years of my sports fandom hating New York teams. After 9/11, I promised myself I will never hate anything about New York again, including sports teams. So I don't hate the Mets anymore, but man, I do like to see them get a little egg on their face once in a while. And this was a little egg on their face. So it was fun. It was fun for me to see. And God bless Correa. He ended up getting a nice contract, with the Twins. Maybe it was a $200 and some million guaranteed contract for 5 or 6 years instead of a $300 and some million contract for 10 or 12 years, but he's still getting paid pretty well. I think his average annual value is like over 30 million. So nobody's crying for Carlos Correa.
Yeah, I think we could live on that salary for a couple of years, you and I. But yeah, the Mets, if anybody listens to this podcast for a long time, they'll know the Mets are my second favorite team. It's sort of an oddball.
Ooh.
that I've always had because, I'll tell the story just briefly. Back in the 70s, my dad used to like to go to games, double headers, and it would always involve the Mets and the Phillies somehow. So that's how I became sort of a Mets fan. Tom Seaver, John Matlack, guys like that way back when, you know, the average listener today probably won't even make the connection, but that was my introduction to baseball back in the 70s. So, I'll be forever longing for the Mets a little bit. I like to go to New York at least once, maybe twice a year or more if I can to see a game, especially against the Phillies. But yeah, Correa, and I wondered exactly what was wrong with him that both the San Francisco Giants and now the Mets have discovered. And they're concerned apparently about his right ankle, which was repaired way back in 2014. So, it must be a legitimate complaint that both of these teams have had to sign him for X amount of years for $300+ million. They just weren't going to do it. And Correa goes to the Twins. So bye-bye, Carlos, and glad you're not a Met.
Yeah, I think from reading between the lines and reading some of the articles that have come out from the reliable sources, that was the concern with Correa was that maybe the ankle, maybe some other issues wouldn't hold up over a decade. So they didn't want to guarantee a contract for that long. And the Mets tried, I think, for a couple of weeks. It seems to negotiate some different language and terms into the deal that Scott Boras and his people were unable to agree to or unwilling to agree to. So, it's their prerogative. Nothing was signed. They went back to Minnesota and said, hey, listen, we're still having a problem here. You guys still interested? Minnesota was still interested, and they did their diligence and they worked it out, and I think this is a good deal for Correa. It's a good deal for the Twins. They get a little protection because only half the deal is guaranteed. And it's still a good guarantee. 5 or 6 year deal is a pretty good deal. It takes him into his early to mid 30s. And so he's going to be, Carlos Correa is fine. He's getting a lot of money. He's going to be the Twins shortstop for the next 5 or 6 years. And, beyond that, he'll just have to play by. And if he's still healthy, Rich, he hasn't had an issue with this injury or whatever is, this prior condition. So he hasn't had any problems missing a lot of games the last few years. So, he's still in his prime, age-wise, athletically. So, I hope it works out for Correa. I hope he stays healthy. I hope he helps the Twins stay as a contending team.
Yeah, and we'll see.
I saw some funny speculation today on if you Google. In fact, he was trending for a while on Twitter. If you go to Twitter and search on Darren Ruff, our old Phillies friend, there's a lot of tongue-in-cheek speculation about Darren Ruff now having to be the Mets starting third baseman. So there were some pretty funny bits put on there. So anybody who's that interested, go there to the your Twitter search bar and punch in Darren Ruff's name and see everything that's come up today.
Yeah, and I wouldn't doubt that for a second. Ruff still can play some ball. Of course, he was with the Giants, I believe, last year. So we'll see if how that works out, if it does indeed come true. And one of the players that is sort of on the fence about working out, believe it or not, is Rhys Hoskins. And a lot of people went down on Rhys Hoskins last year for some reason, Matt. I really wasn't one of those people. Let's look at his stats real quick. 33 doubles, 30 home runs, and 79 RBIs. I don't really think that that's that bad of a season for a first baseman like Rhys Hoskins, but yet when I read different things across the web, different Phillies fans, they sort of lost a lot of faith in Rhys Hoskins. Can you tell us a little bit about where he sits with you for 2023?
I think Rhys has a lot to prove. Back in November, Rich, so you're touching on something that I just touched on a couple of months ago. In fact, right after the postseason, I wrote an article at my website that it was titled "Phillies Have a Rhys Hoskins Problem," and the biggest thing that I was concerned about with Hoskins was he just is terrible defensively. His power bat is fine. You know,
Mhm.
he's a 30 home run potential. I think Rhys is a potential 40 homer guy if you ever put it all together. From 2020 and 2021, which was the pandemic year, which we all know was shortened, and then 2021, he lost pretty much the last entire 5 or 6 weeks of the season due to a late season injury, which may have helped the Phillies' chances of missing the playoffs in 2021. But he played in 148 games over 2020 and 2021, which is basically a full season's worth of games. And he hit 37 homers with 97 RBI. This year he had the 30 homers. So Rhys he averages 36 homers and 98 RBIs for every full season, 162 games he plays. So he doesn't play 162 games, obviously, but he's certainly a 30. I think we can all agree he's a 30 homer guy. And he has the potential to be a 35, 40 homer guy. He just, his career slash line is 242, 353, 492. He gets on base. We all know that. He knows how to take a walk at 353, but that batting average of 242, he's kind of like the three true outcomes guy, you know, the home run, the strikeout, or the walk. And he's a clear liability defensively. His range isn't that great. He made a dozen errors over 150 games this year during the regular season, and plays that he didn't make that other first basemen do make, that didn't turn out to be ruled as errors. Just if you watch him every single day, his play at first base has become a problem, and it showed up in the postseason a couple of times as well. So I like Rhys Hoskins. You know, I think everybody, I haven't heard very few Phillies fans who don't like Rhys Hoskins. You know, he's a likable guy. He's got a lot of fire and passion. He's obviously a key guy in that clubhouse. You know, I haven't done my homework on this because you're just kind of throwing it up at me, but he's at this point got to be one of the longest guys in their clubhouse, one of the senior guys in that clubhouse. Just glancing down their roster right now, there's not a lot of guys other than maybe Aaron Nola who have been around as long as Rhys Hoskins has. So he's almost like, but he's far from the best player. And a lot of people would say Bryce Harper is probably, you know, their emotional leader. Hoskins is he's their team union rep. Mm-hmm. And he's probably their leader in the clubhouse as much as anybody is. So, and that clubhouse, that clubhouse energy, that clubhouse atmosphere, the Phillies grew a pretty strong, solid, tight clubhouse group last year. And Hoskins is right there, smack in the middle of that, front and center. So he's probably going to be here, you know, I think he's got another couple of years before he can become a free agent. Mm-hmm. But what do we do with him beyond that? I mean, you know, there's been talk of maybe Bohm goes to first. They get somebody else somebody else comes along, or they sign another free agent at third. Maybe Rhys can DH, but I'm going to be very curious to see how they handle the Rhys situation as he moves closer to free agency. For this year, he's going to be the Phillies' first baseman. He's going to bat probably somewhere between the 2, 3, 4, 5 spots in their order.
Yes.
But, you know, I think that they have a Rhys Hoskins problem. I'm just not sure how big a problem it is.
It sounds like a syndrome of some sort. I've got a Rhys Hoskins problem. Right in here.
Instead of 242, Rich, I wish he was hitting 262. You know, I think that you would see him get to that 40 homer mark if he was hitting 262, 265. I think that if he was, and I don't know if he's he's capable because he's in the prime of his career now. So you would think that whatever he was going to learn about playing the first base position, he would have learned by now. You think that if there was any more to teach, it would have been taught by now. So I don't know that he can improve as a defensive first baseman. I think they're just going to have to live with it, pretty much what he is as a defender, and we'll see. You know, I think 2023, Rich. I think I see. You know, if he stays healthy, I see a 35 home run season out of Rhys. A lot of emotion. A big guy in the clubhouse, and you know, he's going to make some errors here and there, and not make some plays that we want him to make here and there. And people are going to get they're going to throw up their hands and bang their heads, you know, over Rhys Hoskins' defense. But then they're going to cheer for him when he blasts
Hits
a
a
home
home
run
run.
and slams a bat down. So,
Yeah,
you know,
absolutely. Well, we'll be talking more about that as the spring comes closer. We're about 5 weeks away from spring training right now. So we'll have some topics to talk about. Bryce Harper and the lack of his play for the Phillies up through the All-Star break for 2023. We'll be talking about that. Nick Castellanos, will he bounce back in 23 for the Phillies? And by the way, I'm on the fence of buying an authentic Nick Castellanos jersey. So if anybody out there listening to the podcast wants to advise me on it, whether I should or shouldn't, it's going to be an expensive buy. It's going to be authentic, you know. I'm talking about $500 for this jersey. So I don't know if I want to go out and support Castellanos that strong, but I'm thinking
you're a
about it.
wealthy guy, Rich. You sold. I saw you were in December. You were the big salesman at your
top-
auto dealer there. I'm giving you a
Top
little
sales in the
pitch
month.
there.
Yeah,
So
I've been
you
saving
know,
my pennies, so to speak, for
okay.
this expenditure. But this is going to be something that I have to think about, of course. But thinking about that jersey for 2023.
Go for it. I say go for it.
All right,
Treat yourself.
that's a vote for it. Thank you, Matt.
Yeah. What do you work for? You're working, you know, this is what you work for. You work for to be able to enjoy yourself, you know, enjoy that money that you work hard for. So
That's
go
right.
out and spend it, buy it.
That's right. You can't take it with you, as they say. We'll be talking about more about the Phillies spring training schedule coming up, starting just in about 5 weeks. And it seems like a cakewalk for us to make it to spring training this year. As you said, Matt, the season was extended an extra month or so, good 3 weeks at least. So we reached spring training faster than most teams did. And we'll be talking about the 2023 schedule as well. Some promotions that the Phillies have coming up. And before I forget to mention it, thinking of promotions, if anybody's looking for a job out there, yeah, if you want to work at the stadium, the Phillies are going to have a job fair coming up January 24th from 4 p.m. to 7 p.m. Just go right over to the Pass and Stow bar there, and you can park in Lot P, it says here on the flyer. Philly's looking for all kinds of people to work as cashiers, attendants, managers, supervisors, cooks. So check it out. You get a free staff meal, team store discount, and believe it or not, Matt, the rates start at $16.05 an hour. God, I wish I was younger. I'd take a job there myself. I remember working for $3 an hour way back when. But so check it out if you want to work at the stadium. Sounds like a fun job. January 24th from 4 p.m. to 7 p.m. at Pass and Stow Bar there at Citizens Bank Park.
I always used to say, Richard, when I retired from, I was, you know, Philadelphia police officer for 30 years. And I always just say, when I retire, my dream job is going to be, I'm going to be one of those, you know, older guys who's down at the ballpark, you know, who walks you down to your seat. And when, you know, if it rains, I chamois off your seat for you and dry it off and say, you know, enjoy the game. You know, well, if they give me a tip, they give me a tip. But if they don't, you know, just meet and greet the people and be at the ballpark every night. You know, I was going to be one of those guys. And I really, I live probably 20 miles from the ballpark up here in the very northeast end of the city. So it's just too much fighting 995 every night to be doing that job. But if I lived down in South Philly still, I would, where I grew up, I would certainly be looking into that.
Oh yeah, it seems like a dream job. You get to watch the game and have fun, meet the fans, like you said. But yeah, can't wait for the 2023 schedule to open up. And we have some expectations that are a little different about the Phillies this year. Last year, it was, how the Phillies going to do. But of course, we made the World Series. So the bar is raised just a little bit higher this year for this team. And I hope they can come close to what they did last year.
Well, the last couple of years, right? We've been hoping for the postseason, and like that's been the talk. Can the Phillies get back to the postseason? Can they get back to the postseason? Well, now they've gotten back to the postseason. So, in fact, like you said, ran all the way to the World Series. But just yesterday, in fact, on High Heat with Chris Russo over there, you saw that the Phillies' very own general manager Sam Fuld was on there, and Fuld was saying that they knew coming into this offseason that they had a lot of work to do. That they weren't going to just sit on their laurels and say, hey, we made the World Series. We don't have a lot to do. A couple of moves here and there.
Mhm.
They were very realistic in that they sort of backed in to the postseason. They did not finish really well over the last 4 or 5 weeks of the season. It was a struggle to get into the postseason, actually. And then once they were in, they caught lightning in a bottle, and it became very exciting for us. But it was still another struggle to get into the postseason. So they knew that Dombrowski and Fuld and company knew that they needed to make some moves. And as we talked about with Scott Lauber earlier, Dombrowski had his checklist, and he and Fuld and company went out there and they checked off, each box. And it seems like, the bullpen seems improved. The rotation looks better. Trey Turner's on board, which should help mitigate losing Bryce for the first couple of months of the season, maybe 3 months of the season.
Mhm.
And then if they can just hang tight, whether that's hang tight in the division for the division crown, hang tight for a wild card spot, Bryce will be back. So I think that we have every reason to be excited this year. Does that mean that we're going to go to and win the World Series this year? Who knows? That's such a crapshoot, Rich.
Yeah.
But I think that there's an expectation now going into the season that we're a playoff team. This is a postseason team, and this is a team that is as good as anybody else is capable of making that run in October. We've seen it already, and I think that they'll be better if they can generally stay healthy. I think they'll be better next season when the postseason rolls around. So we'll see, but it is exciting, I think, right now, and more exciting than it's been around here in years.
Yes, indeed. Well, it's exciting here at the Starbucks right outside of Atlantic City. I've been
Doesn't look too
smelling.
exciting, Rich. I don't see a lot of people buying
I've been smelling
Lata or whatever the heck you're buying there.
that roasted coffee's behind me, and it's got my testosterone flowing here. I want some more coffee in me.
Hey, you know what, Rich? My advice is get up, leave, and go to Wawa and get a coffee. Best coffee in the world, Wawa.
I'll tell you, yeah, I'd probably do
Some of that Irish cream in it. That's my favorite.
I'd probably do the show from Wawa if they had tables, but I do like Starbucks an awful lot. But let's tell the folks where they can find you on the internet, Matt, to follow your Phillies wisdom.
It's always the best place, Rich, and I'm kind of like consolidating everything now down to my Twitter feed, which is at Phillies Bell. So go to at Phillies Bell, like this bell here that you see that always rings when the team hits home runs at the ballpark and that you have outside of the ballpark. Yep. At Phillies Bell on Twitter. I'm there every day, put up interesting history notes, any breaking news that comes out, such as Francisco Morales is now back with the team. We found out today he cleared waivers. He had been DFA'd maybe a week ago. Now he's back with the team and has been sent to Lehigh Valley. I'll put all that kind of stuff up, share the best articles that are written every day by our local writers like Scott Lauber. And any good information and news that I find from around MLB that would be of interest to Phillies fans. So pretty much the whole ball of wax, even during games. A lot of times I'll live tweet, some when some big things happen. So great resource, I think, for Phillies fans.
Yes, indeed. I follow it every day, of course, and find me at Fightin' Phillies on Twitter. You can check out the blog, fightinphillies.com. Of course, this podcast that you're listening to, the Phillies Talk podcast, which, like I said in the opening, the longest running independent show. This show started way back when Scott Lauber started at the Inquirer back in 2006. So it's been a long time, but it's been a great ride, and I love doing the show and have a lot of fun blogging about the Phillies as well. Going to see him. Of course, Matt and I did opening day last year. Maybe we'll do it again this year. But can't wait for the season, Matt, and I can't wait for the next show. So we'll be talking to our listeners soon out there, and I want to tell everybody to have a great week. Get those Phillies gifts that you have for the gift cards and whatever you have. Get ready for the season because I think it's going to be good.
Happy New Year to everybody. Hope everybody, Phillies fans out there, have a happy, healthy, safe New Year ahead, and your families, and get out to the ballpark this year. It's going to be a good time.
Yep. Thanks for joining us, everyone, and have a great day. We'll talk to you soon. Bye.